you were born in the 1960s, you witnessed some terrible laws that would seem ridiculous today. It's amazing to see people live normal lives under these restrictions. Here are 15 things banned in the 1960s but are normal now. Number 1. Owning a credit card. If you were born after the 1960s, you're lucky. You're even luckier if you are an unmarried woman. Banks could refuse to issue you a credit card for being single. And even if you were married, they needed your husband to cosign. As recently as the 1970s, credit cards were issued with only a husband's signature, and some women had no problems with that. It was not until the Equal Credit Opportunity Act of 1974 that it became illegal to refuse a credit card to a woman based on gender. Not so good old days, you know. Number 2. Serve on a jury. Depending on the state, women were not allowed to serve on the jury in the 1960s. The reason was simple. At the time, women were considered the center of the home. They were the primary caregivers for their children. Women were believed to be too fragile to hear gruesome details about crimes. Above all, they were sympathetic by nature. Their emotions could cloud their reasoning and lead to wrong judgment. In 1961, the Supreme Court upheld a Florida law that exempted women from serving on juries. This bizarre law was reversed in 1973. Number 3. Birth control. Reproductive freedom was banned during the 1960s. This topic wasn't even discussed openly. In 1957, the FDA approved the birth control pill only for severe menstrual distress. And in 1960, the pill was approved for use as a contraceptive. Even so, birth control was illegal in some American states. At most, it was prescribed to only married women for family planning. Some activists said it was immoral and promoted prostitution. It wasn't until several years later that it was approved for use by all women regardless of marital status. Number 4. No Ivy League education. Did you also know Ivy League education was banned for women in the 1960s? Yale and Princeton didn't accept female students until 1969. Harvard didn't admit women until 1977. Only the University of Pennsylvania accepted women as far back as 1876, and Cornell admitted its first female students in 1870. Other schools like Brown, Dartmouth, and Columbia did not admit women until 1971, 1972, and 1981. It must have been terrible being a woman in the early 60s. Number 5. No equality in the workplace. As early as 1963, women earned 59 cents for every dollar a man earned. They also did not do professional jobs like men. Even if they did, their wages were still lower. However, in 1964, the Civil Rights Act was enacted. The law made it illegal to discriminate based on race and gender. Years after this law was passed, it was not taken seriously. The National Organization of Women was founded to enforce equality for women. They challenged several discriminatory laws against women. For instance, female airline flight attendants were mandated to reach a particular height, maintain a certain weight, and resign if they married. Before we get to the next banned item, here is the winner of last week's shoutout, Niels Donker. Sorry I butchered your name. Congratulations! If you want to win next week's shoutout, just subscribe to our channel and say I subbed. Let's keep it going. Number 6. To Kill a Mockingbird. If you read the book To Kill a Mockingbird in the 1960s, you should be punished. This is because Harper Lee's 1960 Pulitzer Prize-winning novel was banned in schools due to profanity and explicit descriptions of rape. Although this novel was loved by many, it was banned in the 1960s. Lee was disappointed after a Virginia school board banned the book in 1966 for being immoral. The book was also banned in Lindale, Texas in 1996 for contradicting the community's values. Fast forward to this day, To Kill a Mockingbird is no longer banned across the U.S. and Canada. Number 7. Interracial marriage. While this may sound unbelievable, it is true. Interracial marriage and sex, known as miscegenation, was outlawed before the United States became a country. You were considered an outcast if you married someone from another race. However, in 1967, the U.S. Supreme Court declared anti-miscegenation laws unconstitutional. Today, marriages are more diverse than ever. The number of interracial marriages has increased from 3% in 1967 to 19% in 2019. Number 8. Shopping on Sunday. Sunday laws were known as blue laws. These laws restrict activities on Sundays for religious reasons. Did you know that shopping on Sundays was illegal in the 1960s? One of the blue laws says you can buy or sell from Monday to Saturday, but on Sundays you should be at home, resting. Many counties in the U.S. embraced this law because it encouraged citizens to rest. In Canada, since 1906, Canada had a so-called Lord's Day Act, which prohibited business transactions on Sundays. In 1985, the Supreme Court of Canada struck down this law, and stores were allowed to be open on Sundays. Although it has been repealed in many cities, it is still effective in communities like Bergen and New Jersey. Number 9. Pinball. During World War II, the New York government named pinball a money-stealing game. They believed it was taking the focus away from fighting the war overseas. As a result, pinball was banned in 1942, and more than 2,000 pinball machines were seized. It wasn't until 1972 that the California Supreme Court ruled that the popular game was skill-based, not gambling. Only then was the law overturned. Number 10. Drinking on Election Day. Drinking on Election Day was banned in the 1960s for obvious reasons. Before this ban, political parties often handed out free alcohol in exchange for votes. As a result, voters were frequently drunk and made irrational decisions. In some cases, intoxicated voters even resorted to violence. For instance, on Election Day in 1975, Ellison Hatfield was shot and stabbed almost 30 times by opponents. Incidents like these prompted the government to take action. Authorities saw the dangers of alcohol-fueled election days and began limiting alcohol sales on Sundays. In Kentucky and a few other states, alcohol was outright banned on Election Day, requiring voters to remain sober between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. If people wanted to drink, they had to stock up the night before. Kentucky overturned this law in 2013, and since then, there have been no reported stabbings at the polls. Number 11. Selling cold beer in Mississippi. Like selling alcohol on Sundays, you could get into trouble if you sell cold beer in Mississippi. Imagine coming home after a hot summer's day and all you want is a cold iced beer. That could happen anywhere else but in Mississippi. It was illegal to sell cold beer at a store in Mississippi. You could sell it at room temperature, but not in the fridge. You'd be declared wanted if you did that. This American state led a war against beer for years. During World War II, sailors drank so much beer that they peed all over the street. Because of this, the city banned beer completely. If you visited Oxford before 1972, you couldn't get a brew at any temperature. However, the city felt they could trust people to treat the city right. So they legalized beer under one condition. It would be sold at room temperature to discourage people from drinking too much. Today, Mississippi is loosening these laws. You can find cold beer around the city. Hopefully this doesn't lead to an increase in DUIs. Number 12. Sports betting. In the 1960s, people were not allowed to place bets on any sport. This was strictly prohibited. Ohio residents had to either travel to neighboring states where sports betting was legal or use unregulated offshore betting platforms, which were not authorized by state law. Ohio has finally removed this ban on January 1, 2023. The legalization of sports betting in Ohio created a regulated system, giving bettors secure and legal ways to place their wagers. Number 13. Dancing. Who would have thought you could get into trouble for dancing? But it's true. Dancing was once considered sinful and illegal. Did you know that Baylor University didn't allow dancing until 1996? And Henrietta, Oklahoma only let people dance within 500 feet of a church or school in 2017? It's no news that Oklahoma hates dancing. Dancing was banned in Japan after World War II because dance halls were the primary place to pick up a prostitute. Dancing inside any hall without a dancing license was against the law in 2015. Only then did Japan realize that dancing was the last thing they should be worried about. The next time you're dancing your heart away, remember, it's an expression of freedom. If you did it years ago, you could have been jailed. Number 14. Embellishing the national anthem. States like Michigan do not care about your fancy vocal stylings while singing the national anthem. They want the anthem to be simple and straight to the point. Michigan loves its anthem so much that it's illegal to embellish it. Putting the anthem into a medley is a serious misdemeanor. Thankfully, remixes were not popular when the law was passed. Otherwise, millions of Americans would be guilty. This weird law was repealed in 2015, and since then, every vocalist has rendered their version of the anthem. Imagine if Roseanne sang it in Michigan. Her embellishment would have made the law book explode. Number 15. Mini liquor bottles. You can drink openly in New Orleans, Louisiana, but you know what you can't do? You're not allowed to buy a mini liquor bottle in the state. Louisiana made it illegal to buy or sell 100 milliliter bottles of booze for some weird reasons. It was partly to punish flight attendants who snuck some airplane bottles home. Thankfully, this law was repealed in 2014, and tiny bottles were back on the shelf. At least we can agree that people are free to buy any size of alcohol they want. Which of these banned things from the 1960s feels weird? Share your thoughts in the comments below.